Thankful for the Lord's blessings on us this week. Let's turn to the book of Malachi. The book of Malachi. This is the last prophet in the Old Testament. Okay? The Bible, as we have it in the Old Testament, is not always in chronological order. Okay? The Bible is not ordered by continuity of events. The Bible that we have is ordered by, subject matter. We've got the law, the history, the poetry, and the prophets. But it just works out that Malachi is the last prophet, both in the Bible as you read it, and then chronologically as well. So Malachi was the last prophet that prophesied to the Jews who had returned after the captivity. Nobody really knows anything about him. The name Malachi means my messenger, but we're not really told anything about a hometown or history about this prophet, who he's related to, any of those things. He really just begins his message. Malachi wrote during a time of religious and social decline. It didn't take long after the temple was finished for the services and rituals to become routine. That is very, very common. It is very easy for people to get into that, where the things of the Lord are just kind of habits that we do, and we lose focus. We lose seriousness about them. They don't mean as much to us maybe as they ought to. Malachi's time was one of half-hearted religious service. And you deal with people that really struggle to grasp reality. What you're going to see here in this book is, as Malachi points out some of the things that need to be fixed, he points out some of the things that are wrong. People will say, but that's not what we're doing, or what do you mean? That's not what's going on. They really struggle to grasp it, right? As people get away from the Lord, as long as they're continuing with all the rituals, as long as they're continuing with all of the services, it becomes hard for them to see and grasp what's really wrong. You could be as far away from the Lord as possible, but still coming to church all the time, maybe even reading your Bible every now and then. There are habits, there are things that we do and that we get used to, and doing those things sometimes divorces us from reality, the reality of the problem. And we think, as long as I'm doing these things, things really can't be that bad. Things really can't be wrong. The book of Malachi kind of shows us that that's not always true. Chapter 1 deals with the sins of the people, really. There are a lot of things that he mentions here. Look here. First of all, the book opens by Malachi pleading the Lord's love for his people. Let's look here. Malachi chapter 1, verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. I have loved you, saith the Lord, yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? You see, the Lord declares his love for the people, but saying it doesn't appear to be enough for the people. When the Lord tells his people that he loves them, they ask for proof. Prove it to us, show us. What do you mean? Where, how have you loved us? And the Lord's really not under any obligation to answer that. The Lord's not really the one that has to answer our questions. But he does, because he says in verse 2, was not Esau Jacob's brother, saith the Lord? Yet I love Jacob. Do you guys remember which brother was born first? Do you remember the one that we would think naturally, physically would have inherited the blessing? Would have carried on the role of the family leader, the godly leader of the family? Do we remember which one was born first? It was Esau, right? And yet God says, but I loved Jacob. And not only that, he says in verse 3, and I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness, whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I'll throw down. They shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. You guys remember what the Old Testament says about the Edomites and the Israelites? Did God not prove time and time again by the way he blessed Israel and basically continued to curse Edom and allowed them to suffer great destruction? Well, I love you, Israel. Yeah, but prove it. Wherein hast thou loved us? Well, how about all the times I blessed you and allowed you to overcome your enemies? What about just Jacob? Jacob against his brother, and I loved Jacob, and I blessed and gave and called Jacob's descendants by my name. And he talks about all the things that he did to Esau's descendants here. Now someday somebody will recognize it. He says in verse 5, your eyes shall see, and ye shall say, the Lord will be magnified from the border of Israel. Okay, someday the people are going to see and acknowledge the greatness of God. It doesn't seem like right now they're in a great place to recognize that and see that. When we get away from the Lord, that is really how it is with us. We struggle and fail to see God's continual goodness in our lives. It was very easy for Israel to discount that when God comes with a simple declaration of how he loves his people. They weren't able to see that, right? They weren't able to see it at that moment. But chapter 1 is going to deal with many of the sins. They're going to be recorded here, the sins of the people of Israel. While all the people are guilty, they're specifically going to mention the priests several times and those in authority as being responsible. Look here in verse 6. A son honoreth his father. Isn't that right? Shouldn't sons honor their father? Well, how about this one? And a servant his master. Isn't a servant supposed to be honoring and reverent to his master? If then I be a father, where's my honor? And if I be a master, where is my fear? The Lord says, it's really easy for you to put it together, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't sons honor their father? Guess what I am to Israel? If a son should honor his father, if a servant should honor his master, how come nobody's honoring me? How come no one fears me, the Lord says? If I be a master, where's my fear? O priests that despise my name. And ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? God says, you have despised my name. Oh yeah, how'd we do that? See, they still can't see it. They don't recognize it. How have we done that? Well, here's how you've done that. Ye offer polluted bread upon mine altar. Ye say, wherein have we polluted thee? What are you talking about? What do you mean? And that ye say, the table of the Lord is contemptible. They offered defiled offerings. And again, they deny that and ask for proof. And God answers by telling them that they just obviously don't really care. Ye say the table of the Lord is contemptible. And if ye offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if ye offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? When Israel sacrificed and offered to the Lord, what were they supposed to sacrifice and offer? Their best, right? They were supposed to take of their first fruit. They were supposed to take of that which came first, that which was the best. That was supposed to be dedicated in the service of the Lord. Lord, you have provided for us. In return, God, we give you the best of all that we have. And the Lord says, you want to know how you've polluted it? You want to know how you've despised my name and offered polluted things to me? You're offering me sacrifices that are blind, sick, lame. You're offering me things you wouldn't even offer the governor. You're treating me worse than you would treat the president. You're treating me worse than you would treat public officials. I have asked the Lord, said I would ask for your best, and I have asked for your best. But you're giving me the leftovers. And they can't see it, right? They keep asking the questions, Lord, but how have we polluted? What are you talking about? How have we despised thy name? And the Lord's got an answer right away. You failed. You don't even offer me your best anymore. You bring me things that you wouldn't offer anybody else. And God apparently, it seems here, is getting the leftovers. That's an easy habit to get into, isn't it? Giving God the leftovers. Giving God second best. taking the best of our effort, taking the best of our energy, taking the best of our sacrifices, that we would make, giving God what's left over. If we can fit God in, we'll do it. Now we know there are some hours blocked off that it's the right thing to do, and there's really not a lot we can fill with those hours and it not look suspicious. So we know that on Sundays and on Wednesdays, we're supposed to go to church. But on all the other times, I think if we're honest, we fit God in if we have time. If we have some extra time, or we're not really busy, or there's nothing really else that we really want to do, we'll fit God in. You see, it's easy to diagnose it when it's, on paper like this, right? You and I both know that Israel wasn't supposed to offer God's second best. We know that they weren't supposed to offer lambs that were blind or lame or sickly. We know they were supposed to offer their best. But Brother John's just come through a passage where he's talked about our lives being a living sacrifice. And that's reasonable, really. That's what we ought to do. That's not going above and beyond the call of duty. That's our reasonable service. We don't always give him the best, do we? So this is a challenge, right? It's easy. We're not talking about sacrificing lambs and those things when we talk about our lives, but we can kind of see the parallel there, that Israel had ceased to offer their best. It says in verse 9, "Now I pray you beseech God that he be gracious unto us. This has been by your means. Will he regard your purse?" Is the Lord going to accept that? Come on, everybody knows the answer to that. That's a rhetorical question. "Who is there even among you," verse 10, "that would shut the doors for naught? Neither do ye kindle fire upon mine altar for naught. I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord of hosts, neither will I accept an offering at your hand." Now, of all that we read about in the book of Haggai and Zechariah, and you've read the book of Ezra, and you look at all the turmoil that Israel faced when they came home in rebuilding that temple. You guys remember the stories we went through? Remember how much trouble Israel faced in opposition in rebuilding the temple, the discouragement they faced as they began to realize, man, this temple's not necessarily like the old one, but God came to them with prophets and words of encouragement and challenged them to finish that temple, and that when he filled it, it would be just as glorious as the first one. You think about all those stories. You think about all that went into Israel getting this temple rebuilt. And now in Malachi chapter 1, verse 10, God says, you might as well just shut the doors of it. What do you mean? They just rebuilt this thing. They just went through great turmoil, great heartache, a great effort to rebuild this temple. And the Lord's like, if you're going to come in here with broken-legged lambs and blind and sickly and offer those to me, just shut the doors. Just don't even pretend. Just don't even play. If you're not going to bring me the best, just don't bother. Boy, that's pretty intense, isn't it? Who would just shut the doors? And then he says, neither do ye kindle fire. You might just quit lighting the fire. Just quit burning things on the altar altogether. The Lord really, really wanted their best. But can't you see how they really struggled to see it? It's apparent they didn't stop making sacrifices. They didn't stop the religious activity or the religious duties. What they did stop was bringing their best. And as they, just got lax, and as it became routine and ritual, and they slowly drifted, they never stopped in their activity, but they got divorced from reality, and they couldn't see, I'm not really that close to the Lord. I'm not really serving God with these things. I'm doing things, but in my doing things, I'm not really serving. I'm not really worshiping and offering what I ought to God. So verse 11, from the rising of the sun, even to the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. In every place incense shall be offered unto my name, and a pure offering. For my name shall be great among the heathen, saith the Lord of hosts. But ye have profaned it, in that ye say, the table of the Lord is polluted, and the fruit thereof, even his meat, is contemptible. Now I want you to think about what they are saying there. Here's another thing the Lord mentions about them. You profaned it, and you say the table of the Lord is polluted. The fruit thereof, even his meat, is contemptible. Can you believe that Israel got to the point now that they actually started to despise things that were really sacred? See, they were bringing offerings, they were bringing sacrifices, they were bringing, the leftovers, what they had left over. But their attitude towards spiritual things changed. Those things that really are holy, those things that really are pure, now they're starting to say those things are contemptible. Now they're starting to despise those things that are holy. And then it tells us in verse number 13, ye said also, behold, what a weariness it is. They grew tired and weary of serving God. Do you believe that? Do you believe that that's possible for people to get to that place or to that point where the Lord looks at them and says, you act like you're just tired of serving me. You said, what a weariness it is. Now God has high demands, doesn't he? God has high expectations of his people. God expects that his people obey him. He expects that his people live for him. In the Old Testament, when it came to physical sacrifices, he expected that they would bring him their best. In the New Testament, as our lives are considered as living sacrifices, we ought to give God our best. We ought to serve. We are encouraged to serve joyfully, to serve and to consider the one that loved us and the one that saved us and the freedom that he has given us. We return in service to him. But ye said, what a weariness it is. It's hard. This is just too hard. God's demands are too much. The fruit and all of the stuff that they mentioned in verse 12, that's just, it's not worth it. It's contemptible. And they began to despise holy things and talk about how weary it is to serve the Lord. So the Lord asked a rhetorical question. Verse 13, ye said, behold, what a weariness it is. And ye snuffed at it. And ye brought that which was torn and lame, thus, and sick. Thus ye brought an offering. Here's the rhetorical question. Should I accept this of your hand? Now here's the thing, okay? And we just got to be honest, because this isn't a fun question, but we got to be honest. Once we have started to give God our leftovers, and we've excused it by saying, you know what, it's just too hard. It's just too hard, and I'll give God what I can give him, and God's just going to have to be happy with that. That's the attitude, right? Because they took the commands, they took those things what the Lord had required, and they snuffed at it. It's too hard. It's too much. It doesn't really mean all that much anyway. What big deal is it, right? Verse 12, table of the Lord is polluted, the fruit thereof, even his meat is contemptible. It's not really that big a deal, right? It's fruit. It's the same. It's not really that big a deal. That was the attitude that they got in their service, right? Where they weren't giving God their best anymore. And they had convinced themselves that it wasn't that big a deal, and God was too demanding, and it was way too hard, and God should be happy with what we're giving him. God should be happy that we give him Sundays and Wednesdays. Are we really supposed to live for the Lord every day? Are we really supposed to give the Lord all of our heart, all of our life, all of our faith, love, our intention? That's just too much. And that's how Israel, that's the message that Israel is brought by Malachi here. There's language that's used in chapter 1 that's really aggressive, as the Lord tells Israel, I kind of would rather you just not pretend just stop burning the sacrifices. Just shut the doors. If you don't want to do it, if you don't want to serve, if you don't want to give me your best, then don't. But don't pretend. Don't say, oh, it's too hard, or what a weariness it is, or, well, it doesn't really matter. Don't say those things, Give me your best. That's what I've requested. That's what I've required, actually, the Lord would say. I ask for the best. I want you to give me your best, okay? That is hard, because you and I both know that we haven't stopped with all the activity. And you and I, we're coming to church all the time, and we're trying to do things that we know are religious activities that are expected of us. But nowhere in that have we really given our best. I'm not saying it's like that all the time, but I think sometimes if we're honest with ourselves, we would agree, you know what? I didn't really give the Lord my best. And the Lord doesn't want him to pretend. He just doesn't want him to pretend. He certainly doesn't want his people to say, to make excuses for it. Like, it's too hard, or it doesn't matter. No, the Lord's like, I'm not going to accept that. That's the rhetorical question at the end of verse 13. Should I accept this of your hand, saith the Lord? We talked about, I think in a couple of Sunday school lessons here recently, we talked about giving. We talked about giving, our contribution to the Lord's work. We've talked about that with our time, with our energy. We talked about that with our money and different things. And one of the things we mentioned there, and I'll mention it again just because some of the kids aren't in our Sunday school class, but can you imagine a scenario where, it's Mandy's birthday or our anniversary, and I get her a present. And as I'm handing her that present, all I do is bicker and grumble and complain about how expensive it was. And you're the hardest person to shop for. And I had to spend 2 nights out after work when I was tired. And I went out and looked for this present. And I bought it because I knew, it's our anniversary. I had to get you something. And grumble and moan and complain the whole time. And, present it to her. And I bet she's going to take it and just be tickled, right? She's going to be discouraged before she ever opens the stinking package, right? None of us have ever served the Lord that way, right? I think we all have. I have, And you know why I'm doing it? Because I know what's expected. Y'all expect me to be here. Y'all expect me to be doing, the things that are required of me and expected. I'm doing those things. I'm not an ounce happy about it. And I'm not giving my best effort or my best intent in it. And I think we all go through struggles with that, where those things that, become habit, they become despised. And we cease to keep putting our best effort forth in those things. Can you believe, again, after all that we read in Haggai and Ezra, and how God promised blessing and was going to help them? He was going to send Zerubbabel and prophets to help them finish that temple. And they get it rebuilt, and there was some excitement there. And now it's not much later, and it's not a big deal anymore. We'll give the Lord what we can, and it's kind of sad. And it's a challenge to us, right? Let's give the Lord our best, okay? And I don't know always what that means. Sometimes you know better than anybody what it means for you to give the Lord your best, okay? So all of us take stock, all of us take thought in our own minds of where we could do better, where we could give the Lord our best. And see, some of us, you may not even see it in me. Because you may not see me doing anything that's different, right? Because I'm doing the things now. You see me doing the things. You see me doing the work. You see me going through the activities. Now, in my mind, I know I'm doing it half-heartedly. You don't know that I'm doing it half-heartedly. You don't know that I don't care. So when I talk about giving the Lord our best, I don't even know that I'm asking you to do a whole bunch of different things, right? It's You know your heart. You know your mind. You know how much energy and excitement you have about the Lord's work and giving to Him and serving Him. And the people here have stopped giving God their best. Okay? Chapter 2. This early part here is specifically for the priests. I think what we'll do is we're going to cut this in half. We'll try to cover chapters 1 and 2 tonight. Specifically for the priests to hear. God warns them of a curse that would come upon them and their descendants if they didn't listen, they didn't lay it to heart. Now notice verse 1. And now, O ye priests, this commandment's for you. If ye will not hear and ye will not lay it to heart to give glory unto my name, saith the Lord of hosts, I will even send a curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. Yea, I have cursed them already, because you do not lay it to heart. Behold, I will corrupt your seed and spread dung upon your faces, even the dung of your solemn feasts. And one shall take you away with it. And ye shall know that I have sent this commandment unto you, that my covenant might be with Levi, saith the Lord of hosts. Now, when the Lord says my covenant was with Levi, we know that that's talking about what? That's talking about priests. The priesthood is called Levitical. Levi was the father of the priestly tribe. So when it speaks about a covenant with Levi, this is not talking about a promise that God made to one man. This is talking about the priesthood. But he's going to do a little contrasting here, okay? Because God's going to point out the difference between the priests of Malachi's day and the priests of all those generations that went before. Notice here. Verse 5, my covenant was with him of life and peace, and I gave them to him. Again, when it says him, it's referring to Levi, which is speaking of those priests. For the fear wherewith he feared me, and was afraid before my name. The law of truth was in his mouth. Iniquity was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and equity, and did turn many away from iniquity. He speaks about the older priests. You know, there was a time when priests, according to verse 5 and 6, feared God. There was a time when Levi, or these priests, the law was in his mouth. When he taught the people right, when he turned many from iniquity and turned them to righteousness. Now here's what you would expect, and here's what I would expect. Verse 7. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he's the messenger of the Lord of hosts. If there's somebody you ought to be able to trust, to know God's law, and to be able to teach God's law, and speak to others and teach them and go to them with questions, who would it be? It would be the priests, right? You would expect that the tribe that was set aside for the priestly work, for the work of the Lord, to know and to teach God's word, you would expect them to be the tribe you could go to with questions that would be honorable and teach and lead in those things that were right. Verse 8. Starts with a big word. But ye are departed out of the way. Ye have caused many to stumble at the law. Ye have corrupted the covenant of Levi, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore have I also made you contemptible and base before all the people, according as ye have not kept my ways, but have been partial in the law. Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother by profaning the covenant of our fathers? You see, not only had the people in chapter 1 gotten into the mess that they had, but now he's talking to the priests. He's like, listen guys, if there's one group of people that I should have been able to trust in this whole nation, it was you guys. I gave Levi, I gave that tribe my law, my word. I expected him to teach it, and there was a time when they feared me, and they taught people right, and they led many to righteousness and away from iniquity. Guys, what happened? What happened? And he's talking to the priests. You guys dropped the ball here. You guys are actually turning now. In verse number 8 says, you've departed out of the way. You guys are turning people the wrong way. You've caused many to stumble at the law. You've corrupted the covenant of Levi. You guys are totally doing everything the opposite of what I expected. So he's talking to the priests, and he's trying to correct them, as well. So it's not just the people, okay? This is, the pulpit's never any higher than the pew, right? The priests were just as guilty. It's easy for the priest to go out and rail when they hear that message. Yeah, you guys ought to be bringing your best sacrifices in here. But the message came to the priests next and basically let them know, hey guys, you guys too. You guys are doing it too. So it's a message for everybody, message for everyone there. And now we get into a touchy subject. This is one of the parts of the Bible where we learn how God feels about families and what happens when families are disturbed, what happens when the family unit is corrupted, because he's going to talk about divorce. And he's going to talk about how these priests and other men had, let's just read it here. Verse 11. Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of God, which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. And this have ye done, again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, or receiveth it with good will at your hand. Ye say, wherefore? Why? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, yet is she thy companion, and the wife of thy covenant. Did he not make one? Yet had he the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one? That he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take ye heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. Now again, most of this is still specifically dealing with the priests, but it does extend even to a greater faction. It appears that some priests and others had begun to divorce their wives and marry strange women of the land, marry heathen women. It tells us there in verse number 11. God in verse number 12 was not pleased with the men that did this and threatened to cut them off. Now there was weeping. It says there in verse 13 that they had begun to weep at the altar. Now there's debate, there's difference amongst commentators about who's doing the weeping here, if it's the priest or if it's the abandoned wives, and that's why the Lord's not responding favorably. In verse number 13, you seem to get conflicting messages from the altar. When one group comes and they're spreading tears, and there's a group that is weeping. There's a group that is crying out, and then someone else comes behind that and is sacrificing and is offering. And that's a conflicting message there. And the Lord's like, I can't do both. I can't answer the prayer of the one that's weeping and accept the sacrifice of, it's hard to accept the tears of the offended party and the sacrifice of the offender. The Lord wasn't happy with this situation. He's going to talk about that. He talks about family. Now they ask why, right? In verse 14, ye say, wherefore? What did we do wrong? What are you talking about? And he tells them that you've dealt treacherously. The Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth. God was aware of the wife of their youth. He was witness. It's interesting. When we get married, you know what we often do? We say vows. It's actually a really, really common tradition. And when you get married, you give vows. Those are promises. Those are commitments that you make. And you know who witnesses those? Well, there's a couple people that have to sign a piece of paper that they witnessed it. And there are other people usually that are in attendance, family and friends of the bride and groom that witness it. Guess who else witnesses it when you make promises? God witnesses it. God sees it. And he says there in verse 14, the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. You committed to her. You promised. You swore. And God hated what they were doing. He tells them in verse 15, God gives us what his intent is for a godly family. And it's this, that he might seek a godly seed, right? God's design of a family is that it be a unit that could work together and go together and continue to produce a godly seed. That's God's order for the family. That's generally the design. I understand that there are couples that get married and they don't have children. There are some that get married and they can't have children that want to, and those are that's a heart-aching thing to think about, that they would want to and maybe not be able to. But generally, you see, here's God's design for the family: husband and wife, the covenant together and produce a godly seed. And he says to take heed that you don't deal treacherously against the wife of thy youth. Those that it mentions in verse number 11, who had an eye for those strange women, those that had an eye for the daughter of the heathen or the daughter of the strange god, just remember verse 16, for the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. God hated it when those priests, when those other men took the wives of their youth, the ones that they had covenanted to, and put them aside or put them away so that they could take the daughter of a strange god, so that they could take another woman. You get an indication in this passage, stronger language really than anywhere else in the Bible, that tells us God really doesn't like divorce, right? I realize, okay, and you and I both know that things happen. You and I know that there are times in a divorce that there is an innocent party. There are sometimes bad things happen to good people, that happen to people that have the best of intentions, that are working hard. There have been times you probably would even say that divorce seemed inevitable or that there wasn't any other option. I understand all of those things, okay? That doesn't change, and I think we should be sympathetic in those situations. When I say this isn't at all to rail on anybody who has been divorced, that has to live with the stigma of being divorced and has been divorced and trying now to serve God the best they can still. What God is obviously against here is these men abandoning their wives for someone else. This whole flippant attitude toward divorce and toward the family, it's really, really bad. Okay? Again, bad things happen. I understand things happen. Circumstances often beyond someone's control happen. But God really hates the flippant attitude toward just divorce, just the idea that you just put somebody away and find another one. That was not God's intent. When he brought man and woman together, his intent was to bring man and woman together to raise a godly seed, to produce families. That's obviously the order and the design. And what these men were doing, God was not happy about. Okay? Divorce is a terrible thing. We have to deal with a lot in our world, right? In our country, it's a very large percentage of people that end up divorced, and that happens. What I want to guard against, okay, and I don't want to be mean to people that are, and I don't really want to be negative to them at all. You know, somebody's past, we'll trust that their intents are to serve God as best they can. Now moving forward. You young people, take a very, very serious look at the person that you are covenanting together to get married to. Because God expects it to last. Okay? Okay, God expects it to last. Take a very, very serious approach to the family, to marriages. That was God's intent. God's intent was for it to be serious, to raise up a godly seed. And when these men took it flippantly, and they came back from the captivity, and they abandoned the wife that they, had covenanted with all those years in the past, and found, someone else, that when they came home, the Lord was not happy. He was not happy about that. You made vows, you made a covenant, and then they broke it. So you read chapters 1 and 2, and Israel is in a really, really weird spot because God's got a lot of different things that he could tell them. And he's telling them, I'm seeing all of these things that are wrong. And here's their response every time. What are you talking about? What do you mean? They didn't see it. They weren't able to see it. Okay? So let's caution. Let's just kind of watch that. We're going to stop there. But let's just kind of take a look at that. That teaches us. That shows us that it's possible for us to kind of get away from the Lord, and the light doesn't always come on. It's not always easy to see and easy to diagnose. Here's the real problem. It's really easy for me to diagnose it in you. It would have been really easy for those priests after chapter 1 to see, yeah, you guys are bringing in broken, lambs with broken legs. You're not giving God the first fruits or the best. It'd be really easy for the priest to diagnose it, and then the Lord comes at them. You guys aren't anything like the priests of Moses' day, and I see what you did to your wives, and the Lord was really, really upset with these priests. So it's just an indicator to us all that we can get away and not even have a clue. Okay? It's really important for us to stay in tune with the Lord, stay sensitive to God's leading, stay sensitive to the Spirit, stay in the Bible, stay in God's Word, let Him speak to us so that we don't get to the point where we don't even see it anymore. Okay? All right. God, we're thankful to come tonight. We're thankful to be in your